I'm Jared Bowen. Tonight on Greater Boston, a new book documents decades of violence, sexual abuse, and deaths inside a New England orphanage run by the Catholic Church. I'll talk to the author of Ghosts Inside the Orphanage on what she learned from survivors and the ongoing fight for justice. Then the director and lead actor of the new Huntington theater play, Kissing, inspired by romantic comedies, young love, and the city of Boston. After the Boston Globe and others exposed decades of sexual abuse by Catholic priests, their reporting sent shockwaves through the church. By far, that was not the end of the story. Now a new book is shining a light on more than a century of abuse at a Catholic orphanage in New England. Ghosts of the Orphanage, a story of mysterious deaths, a conspiracy of silence, and a search for justice, details the horrific abuse of children living at St. Joseph's Orphanage in Burlington, Vermont, and the survivors' ongoing battle to hold the church accountable. Author Christine Kenneally joins me now. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, congratulations on this reporting, and we'll talk through this. This isn't just this one orphanage in Vermont. This is around the world. You did layered reporting on this for 10 years, reported on it for BuzzFeed, then went back for this book. But ultimately, what fundamentally did you learn about this structure of abuse in orphanages?
Yes, that it's pervasive, that it's completely invisible, even now. Even after 2002 and the pre-sexual abuse crisis, there were millions of children in the 20th century who spent time in orphanages, people who are still 50, 60, 70 years old now. They suffered emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and physical abuse, and at the time it was completely invisible to the outside world, and until recently it has remained so.
Well, who were these orphans? You write this was not Shirley Temple, this was not Little Orphan Annie.
Right. That's right. So mostly these were families who were affected by poverty in some way. Perhaps one of the parents had died. Maybe they died in war in World War II. Maybe they died, there'd been illness in the family, or there was just struggle. There might have been addiction, or the parents might have separated. Sometimes I heard plenty of stories that the priest would just go along to the newly single mother and suggest that she put her children in the orphanage as a way to sort of take the load off, get her own, go to work herself and get the children educated. So rarely was it the case that anyone in an orphanage was an actual orphan who'd lost both parents.
So let's move to St. Joseph's in Burlington, Vermont. Perhaps because we can identify with something in our own backyard and therefore be horrified by what we learn. You were incredulous at points about what was so hard to believe about some of the things that you started to hear.
I was. The stories were just so extraordinary. Initially, people would tell me about physical abuse, and sometimes that ranged from what you would consider the normal spectrum of 1940s, 1950s corporal punishment, kids being whacked on the knuckles, that sort of thing. But inside St. Joseph's, it included abuse that was so violent and so unhinged. Adults, then children, remembered blood splashing up against the walls, remembered children being thrown downstairs, and psychological abuse as well, children being held outside windows upside down to punish them and to terrify them as well. That's just a small amount of what I discovered. Every story led me to another story, and each was more incredible than the last.
And we're getting a bit psychological here, but and you write about this, about you're having to move forward to believe these stories. Even after all the reporting you'd done, why was that so out of the realm for you? It
just was a matter of accruing the evidence, because these were memories from a very long time ago. It's really important when the claims are dramatic, when the stakes are high, to verify as much as you possibly can. Eventually, what really helped was just staying with the story for long enough that someone's story from the 40s was finally verified 2 years later by someone else's story, that, there was a pattern very much of the kind of treatment, but also specific individuals were named. It all knitted itself together in an incredibly compelling way. It just took a really long time and a lot of reporting to do that.
So here is where it becomes I think, still incomprehensible to so many of us that here you have an institution in Burlington, Vermont. It's right there publicly, but we have no idea. They had no idea at the time, decades ago, what was going on. How was that allowed to happen? How could they keep those secrets in those brick walls?
Yeah, so one of the really strictly held values of the nuns at the orphanage was obedience, not just goodness, not just charity, not just kindness, but obedience. And that was very much framed as a spiritual value. So was silence. There are messages all through the documentations that I was able to see from the Sisters of Providence where they are enjoined again and again to be silent, and specifically with respect to priests who came and went in the house. It wasn't just the priests who were abusive, though. It was the nuns as well. Children were abused by male and female predators. And, you know, it was so closed off. In the 1990s, people came forward. There was this moment where individuals had acquired enough resources, I think, to finally be willing to come out and tell their story, even though they were still very traumatized. The culture was slightly more willing to hear it. A group of them got together. They engaged in litigation against the diocese, and they were crushed by that process. So what could have been an incredibly important moment, not just in Vermont history, but American history, was just shattered.
When you say crushed, what do you mean?
The litigation failed. The judges basically said the statute of limitations ruled most people out. So most stories were told and then just dismissed again. Some people were able to settle. I think those were the ones where, you know, the evidence based on correlation from other kids was just undeniable. But in settling, they were afraid to ever talk about it again. So this sort of very destructive process of litigation meant that these very traumatized people went away, often feeling incredibly defeated and utterly exhausted and still not believed. It took a long time before they were willing to talk about what happened to them again.
I'll return to them in a moment, but again, we're forced to reconcile how this can happen within a church structure. Here in this case, it's the Catholic Church structure. There's obviously nothing religiously fundamental about harming, abusing, murdering children. Why did this happen? Why was this whole system in place there?
Yes. So that's the question, and I think, in fact, you know, a number of people have come up to me after readings since the book came out and have said, you know, absolute power corrupts, or power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think it's very true of St. Joseph's and all these other orphanages. There was a priest in charge. He was very much treated as the god. There were 20 or 30 nuns beneath him, and as I said, very much committed to obedience and to silence. And, you know, there was a culture of protecting the church over and above protecting children. In addition to that, inside these institutions, children were dehumanized in an extraordinary way beyond what we think of normally as abuse. Many of them were addressed just by a number. Their name was replaced with a number when they entered the orphanage. Children were told they had to sleep in a certain position and not move throughout the night. And if they did, they would be punished. And I've spoken to people who were woken in the middle of the night by a whack to the head from a nun. So I think the culture of silence must have been incredibly encouraging to predators. Any predators in the church would have known that access to children would have been both easy and untraceable, essentially, at these orphanages. I'm sure some of the nuns felt the same way. And then there was this sort of large group of people around them protecting them. From my reporting and based on the church's own documentation, which only came out in 2006, long after they'd engaged in the 1990s litigation, it's clear that 6 of the 8 priests who were in charge of the orphanage, who were the god at the orphanage, between the years of the 1930s and the 1970s, they were all predators.
So this is what maybe it's my stage of life at this point, that I've been fixated on this recently. I don't know if you can answer this question, but what is it about somebody that allows them to perpetrate this kind of violent abuse? I think it's even more incomprehensible when they're in a system where they're looking around, they're seeing others do it. Maybe it's fortunate that neither of us could possibly understand it, But I just can't understand it. I don't know if you have insight in your reporting.
I understand that, and I still feel shocked myself. People have been coming up to me and introducing themselves, people that I never spoke to report the book, telling me part of their story. I still feel shocked about what happened to them. As far as what allows it to happen, I think it's actually really complicated, and that's why this book is really important, but I think it should be the first of many. This is a massive system that requires so much more attention from historians and journalists and scholars and researchers. So essentially, there were some individuals in these places that I think can be fairly described as sociopaths or psychopaths, people who took great pleasure in hurting others and who felt no guilt about it. And then around them, you had individuals who were perhaps not quite as extreme as that, but situationally, they became violent and aggressive too. The children were dehumanized. They felt they could take whatever it was they were angry about out on the children, and the system supported that. So there were individuals who kids sometimes remembered as mostly good, but occasionally terrible. So I think there was just this huge spectrum of terrible adult behavior.
I want to bring something up on the screen. I was struck by this line in your book, that this trauma was unique in particular and not yet fully understood by modern psychology or psychiatry. That means not fully understood today. We think we're so advanced, we think we've seen so much, we've covered so many of these stories, but what is it that makes this, even today, difficult to process?
Yes, because of the complete way in which these children were just cut off from the rest of the world. They were just entirely incarcerated and at the mercy of this system and of these individual abusers in that system as well. Certainly, we've learned so much about trauma in the last few decades, and one of the most important insights from the pre-sexual abuse scandal is this dawning understanding that still, I think, needs to be driven home now, is that it takes decades sometimes for people to acknowledge what happened to them. That is a normal and natural process, and that is why the statute of limitations on sexual abuse claims for children, as well as physical and emotional abuse claims for children, where they exist, work for predators, absolutely work to the advantage of predators.
I said a moment ago that I wanted to return to the victims who now I think many people are wondering about their memories because it was decades ago. We've seen court trials go awry because defense attorneys will attack their memories. Where do these victims stand now, and how credible are people finding them?
Yeah, so in the 1990s, a lot of people took the stand, gave depositions, and their memories were very aggressively attacked by the lawyers for the defense. I've spoken to them 10, 20 years later, tracked a lot of these people down, and by bringing their stories together, it's really clear to me that the memories are solid. The memories are absolutely solid. Sometimes they're backed up by documents that I've found, even documents that were later released by the diocese. Trauma obviously affects different people differently, but certainly in the case of a lot of people I spoke to, it really froze in time what happened to them, and the vividness and the physicality with which they were able to describe what happened to them certainly had stayed with them forever, and they were able to tell me about it, and then I was able to corroborate quite a lot of those stories.
So I was one of those reporters. I was one of thousands of reporters around the globe who began reporting on this, in my case, for about a year after the church sexual abuse crisis broke here in Boston. I thought we had all done our jobs. We had uncovered so much that this had been fully exposed. Here we are 20 years later?
Yes.
And you're finding more and more stories. Do you have any idea the scope of what's left to be discovered?
Yeah, I mean, you did your job, and there was so much, and that wave that started in Boston in 2002, that is still crashing around the world. So just recently in Europe, Spain, Portugal, France held government inquiries, and for the first time validated the stories of victims. In France, I think there's an estimate of 200,000 kids that have been affected, a minimum 200,000. So that story's still unfolding. This is a really important part of that story, though, too. And there is much more. St. Joseph's Orphanage in Burlington was just one of the orphanages in that state. There are orphanages in every state in America, and all of their stories need to be told.
Canada, it seems to be one of the only countries that has put together a task force for moving this forward and really addressing this forthrightly. What are we facing here in the United States to make it an easier path?
it would make a big difference if state governments got behind the victims and helped them. So after the 2018 BuzzFeed News article, the State Attorney General in Vermont launched both a criminal investigation and a restorative justice process. And that restorative justice process was not just incredibly important for the victims, it was a way of the state saying, we believe you, we should have listened to you a long time ago, and we're here to support you now. But in fact, it's enabled these survivors to effect huge change. Already, it's just been a few years. They contributed to the repeal of the statute of limitations on sexual abuse in Vermont. They also were solely responsible for the repeal of the statute of limitations on childhood physical abuse in Vermont, both in civil litigation. They have had a burst of creativity. They've published their own book. They've written their stories. And right now, they're looking for donations for a memorial garden down at St. Joseph's in honour not just of what happened to them, but the 13,000 children who passed through in the history of the orphanage, and to make sure people don't forget so it doesn't happen again.
Well, Christine Kenneally, it's amazing reporting, as I said. Thank you for your work.
Thank you so much.
The book again is Ghosts of the Orphanage, a story of mysterious deaths, a conspiracy of silence, and a search for justice. Next, a story of romance, love, and art set right here in Boston. The hilarious new play, Kissing, tells the heartwarming and hilarious story of LaLa, a high school-aged budding artist diving headlong into that wincingly awkward milestone known as first love.
I wanted to celebrate tonight with a burger, because tomorrow I go to school and get made fun of or ignored or pitied. So excuse me if I don't believe you when you tell me I'm attractive, but right now I look the worst I've ever looked in my entire life. You're a liar, and you're weird, and you're rude. I was here first, so just disappear now.
I'm gonna go. Kissing comes from Boston native and playwright Lanelle Moise, who says she was inspired by rom-coms, humid summers, and PDA to write what director Don M. Simmons calls a love letter to Boston. Don M. Simmons joins me now, as does the actor we just saw playing LaLa, Regan Sims. Welcome to both of you.
Hello. Hello,
and
thank
we're
you.
all still laughing at the show.
Yes,
I saw this opening night and I loved it, as did so many of my colleagues and the theater goers. There's so much love for this show. I'll start with you.
Yeah.
This is awkward. It's love. We identify with it. It's all the things. How do you see this story?
I see it as such a brave and bold journey into a Black love story. Lanelle is so smart at writing for young people, and it has been so easy to slip into because I feel like I relate and identify with LaLa so much to the point where it like bubbles up and is just this giddy energy that I have as an adult but also had as a teenager. So it's been a whirlwind of love and joy.
Well, Don, this is a world premiere that was it commissioned? How did it come to fruition?
Well, so Lanelle has been on this track for a while. It was commissioned in one place. She came to the Huntington, was part of their Playwriting Fellows program, worked on it there as well. And then I think she's been sort of workshopping this over the last few years. And then Charles, who is the director of new work there, brought it to the front porch when we started our residency. And we
That is your theater company that you co-founded.
Yes. Right. I should be better at this, right? Brought it to us, the Front Porch Arts Collective in residence at the Huntington. And we there was so much joy when we read it. There was so much just giggling and surprise and love and warmth. And we just knew we had to do it. And so that's how it wound up with us.
You know, one of the things that struck me as I was watching that night was here, ostensibly, we're watching a 15, 16-year-old, but played by adult actors. And I was thinking about this so much after that I don't think it matters what age this happens, these first connections happen. Isn't it always awkward? Is this what makes it universal?
Yes, it's always awkward. It's always messy. There's always a little fumbling into falling in love. I mean, that's why they call it falling, because it's kind of with reckless abandon. And I feel like it's taught me a lot about myself as a human and as a person that also it craves love and joy and finding that in another person, in companionship and friendship and romantic relationships. But like, yeah, I feel like it's been a pleasure to work with adults that are also trying to figure out these complex and complicated emotions. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And part of this, the magic here is the chemistry that you all have in these pairings. And I'll ask you about the series of duets that we see.
Yeah.
But how did you find that did you have to find the chemistry? Was it there?
It was already there. Like, first, we had a workshop last summer.
in the summer.
And I met Shamarke and Ivan for the first time, and we clicked.
They play the twin brothers,
Donnie and Albert.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we clicked. The first reading, we were like, oh my goodness, this is gonna be so much fun. Just being in the room with them. They're intelligent, brilliant, grounded, funny people. So it was so easy for me to jump into this world with Don and Linnell, as well, because they have such a wonderful connection and relationship and understanding of this world. So it was, I mean, so easy. There was so much ease and delight. Yeah.
I mean, I can't speak to that enough. Just putting all of these folks together in the room and then hearing it. And there was this moment where I'm like, I really don't have to do anything. Just let them say it. And it's good. Linnell's writing is incredible, but like your chemistry with everybody, I mean, I don't know. This was just a group that I'm like, there's no way. We paired this in a couple of different ways. And I'll tell you, like, inside baseball, we had the boys switch on and off for the roles just to see what it was. And in any combination, it was just like, this is fantastic.
Delightful.
Well, that's what happens when you have talent.
It is.
Well, I want to ask you about this structure that I mentioned just a moment ago, that we're really seeing this in a series of duets. It's LaLa with each of the boys that she's finding this romantic relationship with, and then really movingly kind of moving up the chain, and we see her parents.
Yeah.
What is so evocative about that structure?
I mean, I think it's a thing that we don't get to see a lot of in theater, in live performance. Just these really gorgeous swaths of two people talking. But that talking is so active in everything they're uncovering. I mean, we're not just listening to two people like read a phone book. They are actually, like, they are unpacking life. And I think because we see the adults at a young point in their lives, the kids at young points in their lives, it's when everything is so high stakes. And I love what Linnell charged us with, which was we get to feel big feelings. We get to take up space. We get to really sort of like just be present. And so then to have these scenes, these compact two people scenes that fill the entire stage. I mean, she charged us and we just filled it. We just filled the charge. Yeah.
So I want to go to opening night, which is when I saw this show.
Good.
And I try to not be hyperbolic, but I don't think I have ever been in an audience like that. It was so charged, so electric. Everybody around me was having such a good time. People were talking. They were responding to the stage because they were so moved. Was that something exceptional, or has that been happening every night since I left?
It has. That was an exceptional night because of we had so many family members and friends and loved ones in the audience. So there was a lot of people rooting for us. But I will say that since we've started, people are bringing their loved ones and their families and their crushes to the theater. So I feel like there's continued to be this energy in the audience of people so excited and full of joy for us on stage because they can connect with it and identify with it so easily. And so it feels accessible and it feels alive every single night. So I've experienced so many wonderful audiences from opening. Opening was very exceptional, but yeah, it has just continued to blossom and flourish, and it's, I really can't thank Boston enough because I'm from New York, so my base is in New York, and I feel like I've met the theater base in Boston, and I feel like they're craving a story like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you about comedy, which makes it even harder. Every theater person, every actor I've ever spoken to has said comedy is way harder than drama. How about directing comedy?
Oh, yes. I think that it is way harder because you don't want to get in the way of it, right? And I think this is, again, what's so beautiful. Linnell has set up these jokes, these situations, right? It's our job not to like beat it over the head, but just to let it happen. And so a lot of this was about the pace. As long as everything is tight, right? That comedy is going to flow. The audience is going to laugh when they're supposed to, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. So it was really about like just keeping pace with those words and those emotions. Yeah.
What is it like to originate a role? You're the first person to ever play LaLa. You set the standard for whomever comes after you.
Yeah, you did.
I love that. I feel such, I feel honored, I feel humbled, I feel such responsibility. And I feel like it's not just mine. I feel like I'm able to share it with the people that are on stage with me who are also originating their roles. And I feel so taken care of and so excited for where this wants to go next and for whoever plays LaLa next. I charge them with love and with joy and with hope. Because that's what LaLa is for me. LaLa is hope in being an artist, in being in love, and having a full, bright future.
Well, I hear you, and I think a little bit of the stories I've heard about Austin Butler, who played Elvis in the movie, and how it was really hard for him to let Elvis go. I'm wondering, is it going to be hard for you to let LaLa go?
With all of my roles, I've been acting for a while. They're always with me. A little piece of them is always with me because I learn from every single character that I play, and I feel like LaLa is so close to Regan that I'm like, okay, like I feel I'll feel easy to let it go because she is also so me. Yeah, I love LaLa, so she'll always be there.
And Don, before we go, I just want to ask you, you helped recognize that we needed this play in this moment. We all needed a really good laugh.
We needed a really good laugh. We needed a good laugh. We needed the love. We needed to be able to be in a space that was warm and inviting. And I wanted to go back to what you were saying about that opening night audience, because that is what I want for all of our audiences. We are here sharing this air together, and I love how polite we want to be as an audience, but what I want is for everybody to feel like that. When you get that, the way that people talked about it, how charged it was when they left, and that good feeling. Like, I think there's so much more to theater, and it can leave you sort of spiritually uplifted. The smiles, the love, and all the accolades that the show has gotten. Those opening night audiences and that kind of audience. Talking back, not too much. But like, be there with us.
Well, congratulations to both of you on the show. I saw you as I was walking out that night. I was going to say hello, but you were about 7 people, in the middle of 7 people deep. And I'll talk to her later, AKA right now.
I love it.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
KISSING runs now through April 2nd at the Huntington Theater's Calderwood Pavilion. For tickets and more information, go to huntingtontheater.org. Well, that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Jared Bowen. Thanks for watching.
I think art has a way